to my class today. We're going to go over interpersonal communication, chapter 6.1, what is culture? There's going to be a TED Talk. I'm not really going to stop it unless anybody has any questions.
Do you know the U.S. solar company's nasty little secret? It turns out if you live in Texas, they have...
A colleague of mine wants to start his talk by saying, if I were American, I would start by telling a joke. If I were Japanese, I would start by apologizing. Given that I am English, I would start by apologizing for not having a joke. In my case, I am Iranian Canadian, so I thought to represent my Iranian side, I start with widely exaggerated claim, as you see on the title. And then I apologize for it to represent my Canadianness. Clearly, you are not going to learn everything there is to know about culture in the next 15-20 minutes that I have. But I'm going to talk about two aspects of how culture demonstrates itself, manifests itself in our everyday life through communication, and to a specific one, communication in terms of insult and humor. But what is culture? It's a fuzzy concept. It is, it's like water to fish. We have difficulty defining it, especially defining our own culture, because it's all we know. There are dozens of definitions has been offered by social scientists regarding defining culture, and this definition that I usually use, it is given by one of the pioneers in the area of cross-cultural psychology, Henry Triandus. He talks about it in terms of human-made part of the environment. It is the tangible aspect of our environment. It's what we can see, the classroom we have built, the parks we have, the highways. That's the material aspect of our culture, but it's also the subjective aspect of our culture. It is how we perceive our social environment, how we function in our families, how we perceive our notion of self, the social norms, the marital laws, the educational framework, the legal system. We learn our culture through socialization, of course. We are not born with particular culture. There are multiple ways of looking at examining culture, and one of the best ways is, or one of the ways that have been studied quite extensively, is through looking at cultural values. Values are preferences and the tendencies we have in our life, and again, it is still in us at the earliest stage of our life. It tells us what is important, what is valuable in a culture. There's a very significant value dimension that has been studied and is quite powerful in terms of examining cultural issues, and that's the notion of individualism, collectivism, suggested by Greg Hofstede, a Dutch cross-cultural psychologist. On one hand, we have individualistic societies. Canada is being one of the top 5 individualistic countries we know of in the globe. And within these societies, we find that the notion of I is highly emphasized. The way we talk about the way individualism is understood is that very loose social framework where the person, the individual, is considered to be very important. We look after ourselves and our immediate family. The I is highlighted. The connection that we celebrate, or the notion that we celebrate, is the notion of the individuality. The uniqueness is valued. Being autonomous is valued and preferred. On the other hand of this spectrum, we have the notion of collectivism, where it is a very tight social framework. The we is highlighted. individual to contribute to the notion of family obligation. And family connection is highly preferred and expected. I thought in order to illustrate this notion of individualism, collectivism, I would talk about two aspects of communication where we see how culture plays a role in terms of social interaction we have, everyday social interaction. Two of those types are insult and humor. So in terms of insult, examining verbal abuse is quite revealing in terms of, it tells us a lot about culture. Because when we look at verbal abuse, we know what aspect of a person is highly emphasized in that culture, that by denying it, we are stripping the person from those characteristics. So in an individualistic society where a person is highly valued and emphasized as unique, we would expect a different individualistic abuse or insult, verbal abuse, than in collectivistic society. I have a study to illustrate that, but before I talk about that classical study, I would like the audience to just shout out some insults that they have heard of, or they use, or they are aware of as a Canadian. Could I hear a few insults, please? What is it? Slacker, thank you. And anything else? Moron, fantastic. So we have slacker, these are stupid, things like that. So look at some of these individualistic insults we are aware of, and to a large extent it is used in our culture, Canadian culture. Idiot, cruel. What we are saying here, we are stripping the person from psychological characteristics that we consider to be important. We are denying a person physical characteristic, ugly, fat, that again we celebrate in our culture. We are denying a person a notion of civility, lack of manner, by saying person is rude. We are talking about the blurring the difference between human and animal, like a pig, dirty. And of course we have sexual insults as well, and these are some of those activities that our culture looks down on or we consider not appropriate. This is precisely what two researchers, Italian researchers, start looking at in Italy. They looked at 3 different regions of Italy. The southern part, Catania, which is considered to be very collectivistic region of Italy. And Trieste, northern eastern part of Italy, and again the northern part is associated to be the individualistic part of Italy. Generally in Europe, the northern you get, the more individualistic you are, or the more individualistic values you hold. And they looked at Bologna, central Italy, where they had, it is not specifically either associated with either individualistic or collectivistic. What they did, they asked participants to write a page of any insult in Italian language that they are aware of, or they have heard of. But in Trieste, what they found was that the individualistic insult that you just saw, and a couple of them you mentioned, it was highly used. It was more used than another type of insult that they refer to as relational insult. This is mostly used in southern part, and would be something like this: you are queer and so is your father. It is a sexual insult that is attributed to the person and others who are also highly important as the notion of who we are and the connection the person has. Wish a cancer on you and all your relatives. In fact, there was an insult saying that wish illness on you and 36 members of your relatives. So there was a number inserted in there. insult, your sexual insult to the family members rather than just the target person. Talking about the blurring between animal and humanity, and individual, but then associating the person's relative to an animal. And of course, incestuous acts, which is again, is considered to be quite offensive. Subsequently, we know from other studies that it's not just people in collectivistic societies that they use these more so than individualistic insult. They also find them more offensive. In a study in Hong Kong, they looked at participants, and these participants through various tasks, they were given different types of insult. Insult that was to do with individual insult, you are stupid. And some of the other insult was, you are stupid, and I suspect all members of your department are stupid. And these participants, they find the second insult much more frustrating and insulting than the first one. People even show higher physiological reaction when we make that distinction. The second concept that just shows this notion of the importance of culture in our social interaction is human characteristic, is humor. And the characteristic of humor, it has been, due to its characteristic, it has been argued that it's one of the most challenging forms of communication. Most of you probably, if not all of you probably are aware that generally jokes don't translate across culture very well. That's not to say there are no international jokes. There are some humor that translates internationally, and they have gained international acceptance. Mr. Bean is one of those, the visual, physical type of humor. It works cross-culturally. But there is something about characteristic of humor that makes it difficult to go from one culture to another. It has been suggested that the key characteristic of humor is the notion of incongruent elements. The more the two elements that in a joke we have are incongruent from what we expect to find, the funnier it is. So generally in a joke, we should expect two scripts. If these scripts go against our expectation, we find that funny. But what is interesting here is what is incongruent depends on culture. Let me illustrate this in a cartoon, a Far Side cartoon that I have here. They find this mildly funny. They find this mildly funny because there's one script that there are a group of scientists. They're all looking pretty nerds, wearing glasses, white coat lab, in this kind of working environment where it's just a bunch of them with all this test tube and there. And the second assumption and the script that is going on is that there's a breakthrough, there's a celebration, and let's toast for that, and let's have a drink. But what is funny is just the scientist drinking out of the lab tube. But we're all aware of that. These are the cultural assumptions we have. We don't discuss this. And that's why it's partly funny we all know what is going on. But both of these assumptions, it's questionable, don't translate well in a different culture. The first assumption, that scientists are nerds. But that's something it's pretty much in most Western societies we are aware of, but that doesn't exist in for example, Taiwan. In Taiwan, scientists don't have the stereotype of being nerd. Rather, the group who is considered to be nerd are officers whose task is to measure hair length of high school students if they are violating the regulation for it. So already we don't have that concept here, so this doesn't translate well. The second aspect is, when you are celebrating, when you are having, you have a breakthrough, what you do, you open a bottle of champagne, you drink. This is also questionable. In some culture, you kill a goat. You don't necessarily have a champagne. But this is also even more interesting when we are talking about humor that is to do with language. So the language-bound aspect of humor that makes it even more complicated than a visual humor such as this. I have a 1-minute video to show you.
You stop here. Okay, so she just went through like all the meanings of culture. Essentially, she went through a lot of insults that sometimes don't translate through everything, but some travel across, that barrier of culture. She also follows that up with compliments. She talks about the scientists in Taiwan. They're not seen as nerds. That would be officers. So she touches up on that. We're gonna do a look at, but it's not gonna really be over what she is necessarily saying, but it's gonna be over culture in general. So if hit host. Just hit like whatever game mode, it doesn't matter. Just do like a quick one. Like, can you hit one? Yes. Yeah, host now. And if y'all could join this, this one y'all. So wait for one more. Let's do the 6. Yours isn't working.
So then they just retake it.
Okay. Looks like Ryan is going to be our winner today. And thank you for your time, and that was my class.